Hi, I'm Zoe. My family used to call me the spare tire. Only useful when something goes wrong with the real thing. Last month, they left me stranded in a thunderstorm because my sister's boyfriend needed my seat in the car. But when that Uber driver called me 3 days later, everything changed. He didn't just give me a ride that night. He gave me the proof that would expose who my family really was. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. There's a particular kind of exhaustion that comes from being treated like an afterthought your entire life. It settles into your bones until you start believing that's all you're worth. For 17 years I lived in the shadow of Brooke Harper, my older sister who could do no wrong in a family that seemed determined to prove I could do nothing right. Our house on Cedar Lane looked perfect from the outside. White picket fence, manicured lawn, the kind of place where happy families were supposed to live. Inside, it was a carefully orchestrated performance where I was always the understudy. Brooke was the star of every scene, and I was the stagehand everyone forgot to thank. My parents, Linda and David Harper, had perfected the art of selective attention. When Brooke walked into a room, their faces lit up like she was carrying sunshine in her pocket. When I entered, they'd glance up from their phones just long enough to nod, before returning to whatever was more important than acknowledging my existence. Millbrook Regional High School wasn't much different. I wasn't bullied exactly. That would have required people to notice me enough to target me. Instead, I existed in that strange liminal space between visibility and complete erasure. Teachers knew my name because it appeared on their attendance sheets, but I could see the slight delay in their eyes when they called on me, like they were trying to place where they'd heard it before. I carried my camera everywhere, not because I harbored dreams of becoming a photographer, but because looking at the world through a lens felt safer than experiencing it directly. The viewfinder created a barrier between me and a reality that had made it clear I didn't quite belong. Brooke, on the other hand, moved through the world like she owned it. At 18, she had already secured early admission to Stanford, been crowned homecoming queen, and somehow managed to date Connor Walsh, the kind of guy who looked like he'd stepped out of a catalog for expensive cologne. She collected achievements the way other people collected stamps, and our parents displayed each one like a trophy in their personal museum of perfect parenting. The morning that changed everything started like any other Tuesday in October. I was eating cereal at the kitchen counter while Dad scrolled through his laptop and Mom packed Brooke's lunch with the kind of care usually reserved for priceless artifacts. Brooke descended the stairs like a queen making her entrance, her blonde hair perfectly styled despite having supposedly just woken up. "Mom, don't forget Connor's picking me up after school," she announced, grabbing an apple from the bowl and polishing it on her sleeve. "We're going to that new Italian place downtown to celebrate my early admission interview going so well." "Of course, sweetheart," Mom beamed. "You deserve to celebrate. That interview was just a formality anyway. They'd be crazy not to want you." I looked up from my cereal. "What about the family dinner we planned? Grandma's coming over tonight, remember?" Dad finally glanced up from his screen. "We can move that to next week. This is important for your sister's future." "But Grandma's been looking forward to it all month," I protested quietly. "She even said she was making her famous pot roast." Brooke rolled her eyes dramatically. "God, Zoe, everything doesn't revolve around you. This interview could determine the rest of my life. Grandma will understand." "Actually," Mom interjected, "maybe you could keep Grandma company while we're out. She always enjoys talking to you." There it was, the casual dismissal disguised as consideration. While they celebrated Brooke's achievements at an expensive restaurant, I'd be home with our 80-year-old grandmother, pretending it didn't hurt, that once again, I was the consolation prize. The school day passed in its usual haze of near invisibility. I sat in the back of my classes, turned in assignments that earned B's, without comment, and ate lunch alone while reading a book I'd already finished twice. It wasn't until the final bell rang that I remembered today was different. Today, I wouldn't be catching the bus home. That morning, Mom had casually mentioned that I'd need to find my own way home because they were all going straight to the restaurant from Brooke's interview. She'd said it while loading the dishwasher, like she was mentioning the weather forecast. No discussion, no consideration of whether I had other plans or the means to get home safely. the sky had been threatening rain all day, and by 3:30, the first fat drops were already splashing against the school window. I stood under the overhang outside the main entrance, watching other students pile into cars with parents who had remembered to pick them up, friends who had offered rides, or older siblings who actually cared whether they made it home safely. My phone buzzed with a text from Mom. "Hope you found a ride. We're heading to dinner now. Leftover pizza in the fridge for you and Grandma. See you tonight." 3 exclamation points, like her enthusiasm could mask the fact that she'd abandoned her 17-year-old daughter at school during a thunderstorm. I stared at the message until the words blurred, partly from tears and partly from the rain that was starting to fall harder. Natalie Kim, a girl from my chemistry class, appeared beside me under the overhang. We'd worked together on lab assignments, but had never really talked outside of academic necessities. She had kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses and always smelled faintly of vanilla perfume. "Waiting for your ride?" she asked, adjusting her backpack straps. "Something like that," I mumbled, not trusting my voice to explain the full truth. "Want to share my umbrella to the bus stop? The weather app says this storm's supposed to get pretty bad." I almost said yes. The rational part of my brain knew that accepting help was the smart choice, but the part of me that had been trained to expect disappointment whispered that getting my hopes up would only make things worse when she inevitably changed her mind, or realized she'd rather not be associated with the school's resident ghost. "Thanks, but I'm good," I said, forcing a smile. "My ride's just running a little late." Natalie looked skeptical but didn't push. "Okay, but if you change your mind, I'll be at the bus stop for another 10 minutes. I watched her jog across the parking lot, her umbrella bobbing like a small boat in an increasingly angry sea. The rain was coming down in sheets now, turning the afternoon into something gray and hostile. Students who had been lingering under various overhangs made desperate dashes for cars, buses, or any shelter they could find. By 4 o'clock, the parking lot was nearly empty. The custodial staff had locked most of the school doors, and the few teachers who remained were huddled in their cars, waiting for the worst of the storm to pass before attempting to drive home. I was alone with my pride, my stubbornness, and a growing certainty that I'd made a terrible mistake. The walk home was 4 miles through downtown Millbrook and up the hill to Cedar Lane. On a good day, it would take about an hour. In this weather, soaked to the bone and fighting against wind that seemed determined to push me backward, I had no idea how long it would take. I pulled my hood up and stepped out from under the overhang. The rain hit me like a physical blow, immediately soaking through my jacket and plastering my hair to my skull. Within 30 seconds, my jeans were heavy with water and my sneakers were making squelching sounds with every step. The streets of downtown Millbrook were largely empty, with most sensible people having taken shelter until the storm passed. The few cars that did venture out sent up sprays of water that added insult to injury, soaking me even more thoroughly. I kept my head down and focused on putting one foot in front of the other, ignoring the way my backpack was getting heavier as it absorbed more water. By the time I reached the halfway point, I was shivering uncontrollably. My phone was dead, killed by water damage, despite being in my allegedly waterproof case. The storm showed no signs of letting up, and the sky had taken on that ominous greenish tint that suggested this might be more than just heavy rain. That's when I heard the car slowing down behind me. For a moment, hope flared in my chest. Maybe someone had noticed me struggling and decided to offer help. Maybe one of my classmates had convinced their parents to turn around and pick up the girl stupid enough to walk home in a thunderstorm. The car pulled up beside me, and through the rain-streaked passenger window, I could see a middle-aged black man with concerned eyes. He rolled down the window just enough to speak without letting too much rain into his car. "Hey, are you okay out there?" he called over the sound of the storm. "This weather's getting pretty dangerous." I stopped walking and looked at him through the downpour. Everything I'd been taught about stranger danger warred with the reality that I was cold, scared, and still miles from home. He had kind eyes and was wearing what looked like a polo shirt with a company logo I couldn't quite make out through the rain. "I'm Marcus," he said, seeming to sense my hesitation. "I drive for Uber." "Look, I know you don't know me, but nobody should be walking in this storm." "Where are you trying to get to?" Cedar Lane, I managed through chattering teeth. He nodded. That's a long walk in good weather. Hop in, I'll get you home safe. I hesitated for another moment, but a particularly vicious gust of wind that nearly knocked me over made the decision for me. I opened the passenger door and collapsed into the seat, immediately grateful for the warmth and the blessed relief from the relentless rain. Thank you, I gasped, trying to wring some of the water out of my hair. I'm sorry, I'm getting your car all wet. Marcus waved off my concern and handed me a clean towel from the back seat. Don't worry about it. I've got waterproof seat covers, had to get them after a few too many nights driving people home from parties. He put the car in drive and pulled back onto the road. So what's a smart kid like you doing walking home in weather like this? This storm came out of nowhere. I wrapped the towel around my shoulders and tried to figure out how to explain without sounding like I was fishing for sympathy. My family had other plans, I said finally. I thought I could make it home before it got too bad. Marcus glanced at me in the rearview mirror, and I could see the concern in his eyes. Your family left you at school, in this weather? They had somewhere important to be, I said, trying to keep my voice neutral. It's not a big deal. But even as I said it, I knew it was a big deal. As we drove through the storm toward Cedar Lane, I found myself telling Marcus more than I'd intended. Maybe it was the warmth of the car, or the kindness in his voice, or simply the relief of talking to someone who seemed genuinely interested in my welfare. I told him about Brooke's interview celebration, about being the spare tire, about feeling invisible in my own family. Marcus listened without judgment, occasionally asking questions that showed he was really paying attention. When we pulled into my driveway, he turned around to face me fully. Zoe, he said seriously, what happened today wasn't okay. I've got a daughter about your age, and if anyone left her stranded like that, there'd be consequences. I looked up at our house, where warm light spilled from the windows and I could see silhouettes moving around inside. My family was probably home by now, having enjoyed their celebration dinner while I'd been fighting my way through the storm. Thank you, I said, meaning it more than I'd ever meant anything. Really, thank you for stopping. Don't mention it, Marcus said. Then he hesitated, like he was debating whether to say something else. Look, I hope this doesn't sound weird, but I've got a dash cam. It records continuously while I'm driving. If you ever need proof of what happened today, you let me know, okay? I stared at him, not quite understanding why he was offering this. Proof? Sometimes, Marcus said carefully, people don't believe kids when they tell the truth about how they're being treated. Sometimes they need to see it for themselves. He handed me his business card, which had his name, phone number, and the Uber logo. You seem like a good kid, Zoe. Don't let anyone make you feel like you don't matter. I climbed out of the car and watched him drive away, his taillights disappearing into the storm. The business card was slightly damp in my hand, but I clutched it like it was something precious. For the first time in a long time, someone had seen me, really seen me, and recognized that what was happening wasn't normal or acceptable. Inside the house, I could hear laughter coming from the dining room. The warm golden light that had looked so welcoming from outside now felt like it belonged to a world I wasn't quite part of. I stood dripping in the entryway, listening to my family share stories about their evening, while I tried to process everything that had just happened. Zoe, is that you? Mom's voice called from the other room. How was your day, hon? I looked down at my soaked clothes, my ruined shoes, my hair still dripping despite the towel Marcus had given me. Through the archway, I could see them all seated around the dining room table. Mom, Dad, Brooke, Connor, and Grandma, who looked confused about why I wasn't joining them. Fine, I called back, my voice barely carrying over the sound of their renewed laughter. It was fine. I climbed the stairs to my room, leaving a trail of water behind me, and carefully placed Marcus's business card on my desk where it could dry. As I peeled off my wet clothes and finally allowed myself to cry, I thought about what he'd said about proof. I didn't know yet that 3 days later, his dashcam footage would become the evidence that changed everything. But that night, shivering in my room while my family celebrated downstairs without me, I just held on to the knowledge that someone had stopped for me in the storm. Someone had seen that what was happening wasn't right, and sometimes, that's all it takes to plant the seed of change. The next morning arrived with deceptive normalcy. Sunlight streamed through my bedroom window as if the previous night's storm had been nothing more than a bad dream, but my ruined sneakers sitting by the door and the lingering ache in my chest reminded me that it had been very real. I'd spent most of the night replaying the evening, wondering what would have happened if Marcus hadn't stopped. The thought made my stomach clench with a mixture of gratitude and growing anger. Downstairs, the kitchen buzzed with typical Tuesday morning energy. Dad stood at the counter with his back to me, scrolling through emails on his phone while his coffee grew cold. Mom fluttered around the island, packing what looked like an elaborate lunch for Brooke, complete with organic everything, and a handwritten note that probably contained words of encouragement. Brooke sat at the breakfast bar looking like she'd stepped out of a magazine, despite supposedly having just woken up. Her hair fell in perfect waves around her shoulders, and her makeup was subtle but flawless. She was scrolling through her phone with the satisfied expression of someone reading good news. "Morning, sweetie," Mom said when she noticed me hovering in the doorway. Her tone was bright and cheerful, as if she hadn't abandoned me in a thunderstorm less than 12 hours ago. "There's oatmeal on the stove if you want some." I poured myself a glass of orange juice and sat at the far end of the counter, watching the morning routine unfold around me like I was observing a play I wasn't cast in. Nobody asked how I'd gotten home. Nobody mentioned the storm, or wondered if I'd made it back safely, or even seemed to notice that my backpack was still drying out by the front door. "Connor's taking me to school today," Brooke announced without looking up from her phone. "He wants to stop by that new coffee place before first period." "How sweet," Mom replied, adding what looked like homemade cookies to Brooke's lunch bag. "Young love is so precious." Dad finally glanced up from his phone. "Don't forget you have that college prep seminar after school today. It's important for your scholarship applications." "Already in my calendar," Brooke said with a satisfied smile. "Along with my interview with the Millbrook Gazette about student leadership. They want to feature me in their weekly spotlight section." I nearly choked on my orange juice. The Millbrook Gazette, for what? Brooke's eyes sparkled with the kind of pleased smugness that I'd learned to recognize as dangerous. "They're doing a series on outstanding local students. Apparently my academic achievements and community service record caught their attention." "That's wonderful, honey," Mom gushed. "We're so proud of you." The irony wasn't lost on me. While Brooke was being celebrated for her community service, she'd literally left her own sister stranded in a dangerous storm. But pointing out this contradiction would only earn me another lecture about being supportive and not making everything about myself. Connor's arrival was announced by the sound of his unnecessarily loud truck pulling into our driveway. Through the kitchen window, I could see him checking his reflection in the side mirror before walking to the front door. He was the kind of guy who wore his Letterman jacket year-round and somehow made it look casual rather than desperate. "That's my ride," Brooke said, grabbing her perfectly packed lunch and giving Mom a quick hug. "Love you." "Love you too, sweetheart. Have a wonderful day." I watched this exchange with the detached fascination of an anthropologist studying foreign customs. When was the last time anyone in this family had told me they loved me? When was the last time Mom had packed my lunch with such care, or Dad had reminded me about something important, or anyone had asked about my day with genuine interest? Connor appeared in the kitchen doorway, his smile bright and confident. "Morning, Mr. and Mrs. Harper," he said with the kind of polished charm that probably worked on college admissions officers and scholarship committees. "Good morning, Connor," Dad replied warmly. "How's the college search going?" "Really well, thanks. I should hear back from Oregon State any day now about their business program." As they chatted about Connor's bright future, I noticed how his eyes skipped right over me, like I was part of the kitchen furniture. It wasn't malicious exactly, just the casual dismissal of someone who'd never registered as important enough to acknowledge. "Ready, babe?" he asked Brooke, holding out his hand. She took it with a radiant smile, and they walked out together, leaving behind the lingering scent of his cologne and her vanilla shampoo. Through the window I watched him open the truck door for her, waited until she was settled, then jogged around to the driver's seat. They drove away in a cloud of exhaust and young love, leaving me standing in a kitchen that suddenly felt too quiet. "I should get going too," Dad said, finally pocketing his phone. He kissed Mom on the cheek and grabbed his briefcase from the counter. "That Davidson merger presentation is this afternoon," Good luck, honey, you'll be amazing. And then there were two. Mom busied herself wiping down counters that were already clean, humming softly under her breath. I finished my orange juice and rinsed the glass, hoping she might ask how I was doing, or mention last night, or show even the smallest sign that she'd noticed her younger daughter had been forced to walk home in dangerous weather. Instead, she glanced at the clock and frowned. You should probably head to the bus stop soon. You don't want to be late. Right, the bus, because unlike my sister, I didn't have a devoted boyfriend to drive me around or parents who considered my transportation a priority. I grabbed my still damp backpack and headed for the door, pausing in the entryway to look back at the kitchen where Mom was now loading the dishwasher with systematic efficiency. Mom? I said quietly. She looked up, eyebrows raised in polite attention. How did you think I got home last night? In the storm? For just a moment, something flickered across her face. Uncertainty, maybe, or the beginning of guilt, but it passed quickly, replaced by the same bright dismissive smile she'd worn all morning. Oh, I figured you caught a ride with one of your friends, she said, already turning back to the dishes. You're resourceful, Zoe. You always figure things out. Resourceful, that was the word she used to avoid admitting that she'd left me stranded. I was resourceful, which apparently meant I didn't deserve the same consideration as my sister. I was resourceful, so it was okay to abandon me and assume I'd somehow manage on my own. The walk to the bus stop gave me time to think, and most of my thoughts circled back to Marcus's business card, which I'd carefully tucked into my wallet before leaving the house. The idea that someone had evidence of what happened was both comforting and terrifying. Comforting because it meant I wasn't imagining things or overreacting. Terrifying because it suggested that what had happened was serious enough to require proof. At school, I moved through my classes in a fog of distraction. During lunch, I sat in my usual spot in the library, picking at a peanut butter sandwich while reading the same paragraph over and over. The words kept blurring together as my mind wandered to the previous night, to Marcus's kind eyes and his offer of help. It was during fifth period chemistry that everything shifted. I was partnered with Natalie Kim again, working on a lab about chemical reactions. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. We'd been working in comfortable silence for most of the period when she suddenly looked up from her notes. Hey, are you okay? She asked quietly. You seem kind of distracted today. I glanced around the lab to make sure no one was listening. I'm fine. Just tired. Natalie studied my face with the kind of attention that made me uncomfortable. She had this way of looking at people like she was really seeing them, not just the surface they wanted to show the world. Did you make it home okay yesterday? That storm was pretty intense. The simple question, asked with genuine concern, nearly undid me. Here was someone who barely knew me, yet she'd thought to check if I was safe. Meanwhile, my own family hadn't even wondered how I'd gotten home. Eventually, I said, trying to keep my voice steady, I kept thinking about you walking in that weather. I almost asked my mom to turn around and look for you, but I figured your ride had probably shown up by then. I stared down at the test tube in my hands, watching the clear liquid slowly turn blue as the chemical reaction progressed. My ride never came. Natalie's eyes widened. What? You mean you walked home in that storm? All the way to Cedar Lane? I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. Zoe, that's like 4 miles. In that weather, it could have been dangerous. What if a tree had fallen? Or there'd been flooding? I know, I interrupted quietly. But my family had other plans. The words hung in the air between us, loaded with more meaning than I'd intended to reveal. Natalie set down her lab equipment and turned to face me fully. What kind of plans are more important than making sure you get home safely? I found myself telling her about Brooke's celebration dinner, about being left at school, about walking home in the storm. The words tumbled out in a quiet rush, and Natalie listened with the kind of focused attention that made me feel like what I was saying actually mattered. That's not okay, she said when I finished. That's really not okay, Zoe. It's fine, I said, automatically. I'm resourceful. Stop saying that. Natalie's voice was firm but kind. Being able to handle something doesn't mean you should have to. There's a difference between being independent and being neglected. The word hit me like a physical blow. Neglected. I'd never thought of it that way before. In my mind, neglect was something that happened to other kids. Kids whose parents didn't feed them or clothe them or provide for their basic needs. But what about emotional needs? What about feeling valued and protected and loved? My parents aren't neglectful, I said. But the words felt hollow even as I spoke them. Maybe not in the obvious ways, Natalie said carefully. But leaving you stranded at school in a dangerous storm, not even checking to make sure you made it home safely? That's not normal, Zoe. After school, I found myself walking home instead of taking the bus. Partly because I needed time to think, and partly because I wanted to retrace the route I'd taken the night before. In daylight, with clear skies and dry pavement, the 4-mile journey seemed almost pleasant. But I could imagine how different it had been in the storm. How frightening and dangerous. As I walked, I thought about what Natalie had said. Was what happened to me really neglect, or was I being overly dramatic, making too big a deal out of what my family would probably call a simple miscommunication? By the time I reached downtown Millbrook, I'd made a decision. I pulled out my phone and dialed the number on Marcus's business card. He answered on the second ring. Marcus Thompson, Uber driver. How can I help you? Hi, it's Zoe. From last night? You gave me a ride home in the storm. Zoe, hey, how are you doing? I've been thinking about you. Are you okay? The genuine concern in his voice almost made me cry. I'm okay. I was wondering, you mentioned something about a dash cam, about having proof of what happened. There was a pause, and I could hear traffic in the background. Marcus was probably out driving, helping other people get where they needed to go safely. Yeah, I've got footage from last night. The whole ride is recorded. Why? Is everything all right? I don't know, I admitted. Someone told me today that what happened wasn't normal, that leaving me stranded like that was wrong. I guess I'm starting to think maybe they're right. They are right, Marcus said firmly. Look, I don't want to tell you what to do with your family situation, but what I saw last night bothered me. A 17-year-old girl shouldn't be walking home alone in a dangerous storm because her family couldn't be bothered to pick her up. I hesitated, not sure how to ask what I was thinking. Would you be willing to show someone the footage, if I needed you to? Absolutely. Any time. I meant what I said about having your back on this. That evening, dinner was another performance of family normalcy. Brooke regaled everyone with stories from her interview with the Millbrook Gazette, complete with details about the photographer and the questions they'd asked. Connor had joined us again, and he and Brooke held hands across the table while discussing their college plans like they were already a married couple planning their future. I sat in my usual spot, eating quietly and listening to the conversation flow around me. Nobody asked about my day. Nobody mentioned the storm or wondered how I'd gotten home. It was like the previous night had never happened, like my struggle through the rain and wind had been erased from family history. The article should run next week, Brooke was saying. They want to include photos from my community service projects and maybe something from the homecoming court ceremony. We'll have to get extra copies, Mom said excitedly. I want to send one to your Aunt Martha, and we should definitely frame one for the hallway. More evidence of Brooke's perfection to add to the shrine our house had become. The hallway was already lined with her achievements, honor roll certificates, competition trophies, scholarship letters, photographs from various events where she looked poised and accomplished. What about you, Zoe? Connor asked suddenly, and everyone turned to look at me in surprise. Any exciting plans coming up? I nearly choked on my water. Connor had never directly addressed me before, and from the way Brooke was looking at him, she was just as surprised as I was. Not really, I managed. Just the usual school stuff. She's being modest, Mom said with the kind of forced brightness that suggested she was scrambling to think of something impressive to say about me. Zoe's very studious. That was the best she could come up with. While Brooke was featured in newspaper articles and courted by prestigious universities, I was studious. That's great, Connor said with what seemed like genuine politeness. What's your favorite subject? Photography, I guess, and English. Cool. You any good with a camera? I glanced around the table, surprised by the sudden attention. I'm okay. She's always taking pictures, Brooke said with a laugh that had an edge to it. Sometimes I think she likes life better through a lens than in person. There was something in her tone that made me look at her more carefully. Was that jealousy? But that didn't make sense. What could Brooke possibly have to be jealous of? Photography's a great skill, Dad said, finally joining the conversation. Very practical in the digital age. Practical. There was that word again. Like everything about me had to be justified by its usefulness rather than celebrated for its own merit. The conversation moved on to other topics, and I faded back into my usual invisibility. But I found myself thinking about Connor's questions, and the brief moment when everyone's attention had been focused on me. It wasn't much, but it was more interest than my family had shown in months. Later that night, I was in my room uploading photos from my camera to my laptop when I heard raised voices from downstairs. I crept to my door and listened, trying to make out the words in. Not fair to put that pressure on her. That was Mom's voice. She needs to understand that choices have consequences. Dad's voice, firmer than usual, but she's just 17, David. She shouldn't have to. Have to what? Brooke's voice cut through whatever Mom had been about to say. God, are you talking about yesterday? Because I am so sick of everyone acting like we committed some terrible crime. My heart started beating faster. They were talking about me, about what had happened. Honey, we just think maybe we could have handled things differently, Mom said carefully. Handled what differently? We had important plans for my future. Zoe is perfectly capable of getting herself home. She does it every day on the school bus, but the storm, Dad started, was unexpected. Brooke finished. How were we supposed to know it would get that bad? And anyway, she made it home fine, didn't she? She's always fine, she's resourceful. That word again, resourceful, the magic word that justified leaving me behind. That turned neglect into a character-building exercise. I just think, Mom said quietly, that maybe we should have made sure she had a safe way home before we left. Oh my God, are you serious right now? Brooke's voice rose dangerously. This is my senior year. These are the most important months of my entire life. College applications, scholarship interviews, building the resume that's going to determine my entire future. And you want me to worry about whether Zoe needs a ride home? We're not asking you to worry about it, Dad said. We're saying we should have thought it through better. No. What you're saying is that Zoe's convenience is more important than my future. What you're saying is that I should put my life on hold because my sister can't figure out how to call an Uber. I pressed my back against my bedroom door, my hands clenched into fists. Call an Uber. She made it sound so simple, like I had unlimited money to spend on rides. Like asking for help was just a matter of pulling out my phone and placing an order. That's not what we're saying, Mom replied, but her voice sounded tired, defeated. It is exactly what you're saying. And frankly, I'm tired of Zoe always being the victim in these situations. She's 17 years old. She's not a child. If she wanted a ride home, she could have asked one of her friends, or taken the bus, or yes, called a ride service. Instead, she chose to walk home in the rain, and then made everyone feel guilty about it. Chose to walk home in the rain, like it had been a leisurely decision, rather than my only option, like I'd deliberately put myself in danger just to make them feel bad. I don't think that's fair, Brooke, Dad said, but his voice lacked conviction. What's not fair is constantly having to justify prioritizing my future. What's not fair is feeling guilty for having plans that don't revolve around my sister. What's not fair is being made to feel like a bad person because I'm successful. The conversation continued, but I'd heard enough. I closed my door quietly and sat on my bed, staring at my hands. Brooke wasn't sorry. She wasn't even slightly regretful about what had happened. In her mind, I was the problem for not being resourceful enough, for not having friends to call, for not having money for an Uber, for existing in a way that occasionally required consideration. I pulled out my phone and scrolled to Marcus's number. I didn't call him, but just seeing his name in my contacts was somehow comforting. Someone out there had seen what happened and recognized it as wrong. Someone had evidence that I wasn't imagining things or being overly dramatic. Tomorrow, I decided, I would start figuring out what to do with that evidence. Because if my family thought this was acceptable, if they thought leaving me stranded was just part of teaching me to be resourceful, then maybe it was time for other people to decide whether they were right. The voices downstairs had quieted, but I could still hear Brooke's words echoing in my head. She's always fine. She's resourceful. Like being fine was the same as being happy. Like being resourceful was the same as being loved. I opened my laptop and stared at the photos I'd been uploading. Most of them were landscapes, empty streets, buildings, without people. Looking at them now, I realized they were all pictures of solitude. I'd been documenting my own isolation without even realizing it, but Marcus had said something about his dashcam recording continuously, which meant there was probably footage not just of our conversation in the car, but of him finding me walking alone in the storm. Visual proof of exactly how bad the weather had been, how dangerous the situation was, how alone I'd been. For the first time since this whole thing started, I smiled. Brooke could call me resourceful, all she wanted. Tomorrow I was going to show her exactly how resourceful I could be. Wednesday morning brought an unexpected gift in the form of Iris Rodriguez, waiting by my locker. I hadn't spoken to Iris in over 2 years. Not since she'd drifted into Brooke's social circle and quietly disappeared from my life. She had changed since then, trading her colorful vintage dresses for the kind of polished preppy style that Brooke's friends favored, but her dark eyes still held the same intensity I remembered from our middle school friendship. "Hey Zoe," she said softly, shifting her weight from one foot to the other. "Can we talk?" I fumbled with my locker combination, suddenly nervous. Iris and I had been inseparable in 7th and 8th grade, bonding over shared interests in photography and old movies. But when high school started, she'd gradually gravitated toward Brooke's crowd, and our friendship had withered without any dramatic confrontation or official ending. It had simply faded away, leaving me with one fewer ally in a world that already felt increasingly isolating. "Sure," I said, finally getting my locker open. "What's up?" Iris glanced around the hallway, checking to see who might be listening. The morning rush was in full swing, with students grabbing books and gossiping about weekend plans. But nobody was paying attention to it. "I heard about what happened Monday night," she said quietly, "with the storm." My hands stilled on the textbooks I'd been shuffling. "What did you hear?" Connor was bragging about the dinner at Romano's, about how romantic it was, how Brooke looked perfect in the candlelight. Iris's voice carried a bitter edge I'd never heard before. "He mentioned that you had to find your own way home because there wasn't room in his truck for everyone." I closed my locker and turned to face her fully. And he thought it was funny. He was laughing about how you probably got soaked walking home." Iris's hands clenched into fists at her sides. "He said something about hoping you'd learned your lesson about expecting special treatment." The words hit me like a physical blow. Not only had my family abandoned me in the storm, but Connor had turned it into entertainment for his friends. My struggle through the rain and wind had become a punchline in someone else's story. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. Iris looked down at her feet. "Because I should have said something when he was talking about it. Because I should have told him it wasn't funny. Because—" She took a deep breath. "Because I used to be your friend, and I forgot what that meant." The hallway around us continued its normal chaos, but I felt like Iris and I were standing in a bubble of quiet honesty. "You chose Brooke's crowd," I said, not accusingly, just stating a fact. "I did, and I regret it. Every day." Iris looked up at me with eyes that seemed older than I remembered. "Do you know what it's like, being friends with your sister? Everything is a competition. Every conversation is about who's prettier, smarter, more successful. She makes sure everyone around her feels small, so she can feel big." This was not what I'd expected to hear. In my mind, Brooke's friends basked in reflected glory, enjoying the social status that came with being in her orbit. The idea that being close to my sister might actually be exhausting had never occurred to me. "Then why stay?" I asked. Iris laughed, but it wasn't a happy sound. Because once you're in Brooke's world, it's hard to leave. She makes sure of that. If you're loyal, you get invited to the good parties, introduced to the right people, included in the group that everyone else wants to join. If you're not, she shrugged. Well, let's just say Brooke has a long memory for people who disappoint her. The first bell rang, signaling 5 minutes until classes started. Students began moving with more purpose, heading toward their respective destinations. But Iris didn't move. There's something else, she said. Something you should know about Monday night. I waited, sensing that whatever she was about to tell me was important. Brooke knew about the storm warning. We all did. It was on the weather app, on the news, everywhere. They were saying it was going to be dangerous, that people should avoid unnecessary travel. Iris's voice dropped even lower. She knew, and she didn't care. The information settled in my stomach like a stone. It was one thing to be thoughtless or forgetful. It was another thing entirely to knowingly leave someone in danger. How do you know she knew? I asked. Because she showed us the weather alert during lunch. She was worried it might affect her dinner plans, so she called Romano's to make sure they'd still be open. Iris met my eyes. She was worried about her reservation. Zoe. Not about you. The second bell rang, and students began hurrying to their classrooms. Iris started to walk away, then turned back. I know this probably doesn't mean much now, but I'm sorry. For disappearing, for not standing up to her, for letting you think you were invisible. She paused. You were never invisible to me. I just got scared of what would happen if I chose you over her. I watched Iris disappear into the crowd, her words echoing in my head. Brooke had known about the storm. She'd been aware of the danger, and had chosen her dinner plans anyway. This wasn't negligence or thoughtlessness. This was deliberate. During lunch, I found myself in the library again, but this time I wasn't reading. Instead, I was researching. I pulled up weather reports from Monday night, screenshot the severe storm warnings that had been issued throughout the day. I found news articles about the damage the storm had caused, about power outages and fallen trees and flooding in low-lying areas. I was walking through this, I thought, staring at photos of storm damage that looked remarkably similar to what I'd experienced. Cars stranded in floodwater, trees blocking roads, emergency responders rescuing people from dangerous situations. I could have been seriously hurt or worse. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. This is Iris. Got your number from the school directory. I have something else to show you. Meet me at Bean and Leaf Cafe after school. I stared at the message for a long moment before typing back. Okay. The rest of the school day passed in a blur of distraction. I couldn't focus on algebra problems or historical dates when my mind was spinning with new information. Brooke had known about the storm and left me anyway. Connor thought my suffering was amusing. Even my parents, who claimed to love me, had prioritized my sister's social life over my safety. Bean and Leaf Cafe was a small, cozy place on the edge of downtown Millbrook, popular with college students and local artists. I'd always liked the atmosphere, with its mismatched furniture and walls covered in local artwork, but I'd rarely had reason to go there. When I arrived, Iris was already seated at a corner table, nursing a large coffee and looking nervous. Thanks for coming, she said as I sat down across from her. I ordered a hot chocolate from the barista and settled into my chair. What did you want to show me? Iris pulled out her phone and scrolled through her photos. This is from Monday night, she said, turning the screen toward me. The photo showed Brooke, Connor and several other friends seated around a table at Romano. They were all dressed up and smiling, raising glasses in what looked like a toast. The lighting was warm and golden, and everyone looked happy and relaxed. It was the picture of a perfect evening out. Okay, I said, not understanding why this was significant. Look at the timestamp, Iris said. I squinted at the small numbers in the corner of the photo, 7:43 p.m., which meant this picture had been taken around the time I was halfway through my walk home, soaked to the bone and struggling against wind that kept trying to knock me over. Now look at this one, Iris said, swiping to the next photo. This picture showed Connor making an exaggerated sad face while pointing to his phone screen. The caption underneath read, "Poor Connor's truck is so small, can only fit the important people." Low. The timestamp on this photo was 8:15 p.m., right around the time Marcus had found me on the side of the road. "He posted this?" I asked. "On his Instagram story." It got a ton of reactions. Iris swiped again. "But this is the one that really bothered me." The final photo was a selfie of Brooke looking glamorous in the restaurant lighting. She was smiling at the camera with the kind of confidence that came from knowing she looked perfect. The caption read, "Family dinner without the family drama." Sometimes you have to leave the negativity behind to really enjoy yourself. I stared at the photo, reading the caption over and over. Family drama. Negativity. She was talking about me. I was the drama and negativity that she'd left behind to enjoy her perfect evening. "She posted this while you were walking home in the storm," Iris said quietly. "While you were in actual danger, she was taking selfies and calling you negativity." The hot chocolate the barista had brought tasted like ash in my mouth. I set the cup down with shaking hands and tried to process what I was seeing. This wasn't just neglect or thoughtlessness. This was active cruelty, packaged in pretty Instagram posts and shared with hundreds of followers. "Why are you showing me this?" I asked. Iris was quiet for a long moment, staring down at her coffee. "Because I've been in Brooke's inner circle for 2 years, and I've watched her destroy people. Not dramatically, not obviously, but slowly and systematically until they start believing they deserve it." She looked up at me. "I've watched her do it to other girls, and I've watched her do it to you your whole life. And Monday night, I realized I couldn't be part of it anymore." "What do you mean?" "I mean, I'm done pretending that Brooke's behavior is normal. I'm done making excuses for her cruelty because she's popular and successful, and everyone thinks she's perfect." Iris's voice was getting stronger, more determined, "and I'm especially done watching her treat her own sister like she's disposable." The cafe around us buzzed with the quiet energy of students studying and friends catching up over coffee. It felt surreal to be having this conversation in such a normal, everyday setting, like the revelation that my sister was actively trying to hurt me should somehow require a more dramatic backdrop. "What am I supposed to do with this information?" I asked. "I don't know," Iris admitted, "but I think you should document it. Screenshot everything. Save the posts. Keep records of what's happening. Because this isn't going to stop, Zoe. If anything, it's going to get worse." "Why would it get worse?" Iris hesitated, like she was debating whether to tell me something. "Because Brooke's scared of you." I almost laughed. "Scared of me? That's ridiculous." "Is it? Think about it. You're smart, creative, genuinely kind to people. You don't need to put others down to feel good about yourself. You have actual substance beyond your achievements and social status." Iris leaned forward across the table. "Brooke's entire identity is built on being the perfect daughter, the golden child, the one everyone loves. But what happens when people start noticing that her sister is actually a better person?" The idea seemed impossible. I was invisible, insignificant, the spare tire who only mattered when something went wrong with the real thing. How could Brooke possibly see me as a threat? "You're giving me way too much credit," I said. "And tell me this, when was the last time your parents compared you to Brooke in a way that made her look bad?" I thought about it. "Never." "Right, because they've been trained not to. Brooke makes sure that any comparison between you two makes her look superior. She's been managing your family's perception of both of you since you were kids." Iris pulled up another photo on her phone. "Look at this." The image was old, probably from when we were in middle school. It showed Brooke and me at what looked like a family barbecue. Brooke was front and center, smiling brilliantly at the camera, while I stood slightly behind her and to the side, partially hidden by her shadow. But what caught my attention was my expression. I wasn't looking at the camera. I was looking at Brooke with something that looked almost like admiration. "I remember when this was taken," Iris said. "It was at the school's end-of-year picnic. You'd just won the photography contest, remember? Your picture of the old oak tree behind the gym. It was really beautiful." I did remember. It had been one of the few times I'd felt genuinely proud of something I'd accomplished. The photo had taken me weeks to get right, waiting for the perfect lighting and weather conditions. But look at this picture, Iris continued. You can't even tell you won anything. You're literally standing in Brooke's shadow while she takes center stage for something that had nothing to do with her. Maybe I just didn't want to be in the photo, I said weakly. Or maybe you'd already learned that making yourself small was the price of peace in your family. Iris's voice was gentle but firm. How many of your achievements have been overshadowed by something of Brooke's? How many times have your parents missed your events because they were busy with hers? The questions hit too close to home. I thought about all the school concerts where I'd played violin to a half-empty auditorium because my parents were at Brooke's debate tournaments. All the art shows where my photographs hung unnoticed because my family was celebrating Brooke's latest academic honor. All the small moments of pride that had been eclipsed by my sister's brighter star. It's not intentional, I said. But even as the words left my mouth, I wasn't sure I believed them anymore. Isn't it? Think about Monday night. Brooke could have asked Connor to drop her off first and then take you home, or she could have suggested meeting him at the restaurant instead of having him pick her up, or she could have simply said that she couldn't go to dinner unless her sister had a safe way home. Iris counted off the alternatives on her fingers. She had options, Zoe. She chose the one that left you stranded. I stared down at my untouched hot chocolate, watching the marshmallows slowly dissolve into white foam. Everything Iris was saying made sense in a horrible, inevitable way. The pattern she was describing wasn't new. I just hadn't seen it clearly before. So what do? I asked again. You stop making yourself small, Iris said, simply. You stop accepting treatment that you wouldn't tolerate from a stranger. You stop believing that being hurt is the price you have to pay for being part of your family. That evening I sat in my room with my laptop open, scrolling through Brooke's social media account. I'd never paid much attention to her online presence before, beyond the occasional family photo that got shared in our group chat. But now, looking at her posts with new eyes, I could see the pattern Iris had described. There were dozens of photos from family events where I was either absent or barely visible, pictures from my birthday parties, where Brooke somehow managed to be the center of attention, photos from vacations where I appeared to be an afterthought, standing at the edge of the frame or partially cut off. But it was the captions that really got to me, post after post about family love and togetherness, about being grateful for the people who matter most. She'd written entire paragraphs about the importance of family support, about how lucky she was to have parents who believed in her dreams. Never once had she mentioned having a sister. I was looking through photos from last Christmas when I found something that made my blood run cold. It was a family portrait, the kind we took every year to use on our holiday cards. We were all dressed in coordinating outfits, standing in front of the fireplace in our living room. But this wasn't the version that had been printed and sent to relatives. In this version I had been cropped out completely. The photo had been edited so seamlessly that you'd never know there had originally been 4 people in the picture, instead of 3. Brooke had posted it with the caption "Perfect family, perfect Christmas, perfect memory." I stared at the screen, in disbelief. She had literally erased me from the family Christmas photo. Not accidentally, not carelessly, but deliberately and systematically. She had taken a moment that was supposed to represent our family's happiness and edited me out of existence. My hands were shaking as I took a screenshot of the post. Then I went to our family's shared photo album and found the original, unedited version where I stood next to my parents, smiling at the camera in my red sweater. The difference was stark and undeniable. I saved both images to a new folder on my laptop, one I labeled simply "Evidence." Then I went back through Brooke's social media, methodically documenting every instance where I'd been excluded, minimized or erased. There were more than I'd expected, stretching back years. As I worked, I thought about what Marcus had said about proof. At the time I'd focused on the dashcam footage from Monday night, but this was evidence too. Visual documentation of a pattern of behavior that went far beyond one incident in a storm. My phone buzzed with a text from Natalie. "How are you feeling about everything? Wanna talk tomorrow?" I started to type back that I was fine, that everything was okay, that I didn't need to bother her with my problems, but then I stopped and deleted the message. Iris was right. I needed to stop making myself small. Actually, yes, I typed instead. I could really use someone to talk to. The response came immediately. Library at lunch. I'll bring sandwiches. For the first time in days, I smiled. Maybe I was invisible to my family. Maybe I'd been erased from their narrative of who we were supposed to be. But there were people who saw me, people who cared whether I made it home safely, people who thought my feelings mattered. It was a start. I spent the rest of the evening organizing my evidence, creating folders for social media posts, weather reports, and witness statements. I didn't know what I was going to do with all of it yet, but I knew that having it made me feel less crazy, less like I was imagining the whole thing. Around 10 o'clock I heard Brooke's voice in the hallway outside my room. She was talking to someone on the phone, probably Connor, and she sounded animated and happy. I know, right? The interview went so well. They said the article should be really prominent, maybe even front page of the lifestyle section. Her voice got closer to my door. I'm just so grateful for all the opportunities I'm getting. It's like everything is finally falling into place. I listened to her walk past my room toward her own, still chatting about her bright future and all the wonderful things happening in her life. She sounded genuinely happy, completely untroubled by the fact that her happiness had come at the cost of her sister's well-being. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling and thinking about choices. Brooke had made choices about how to treat me. My parents had made choices about whose needs to prioritize, and I had made choices about how much I was willing to tolerate. But now I was making a different choice. I was choosing to stop accepting the unacceptable. I was choosing to document what was happening instead of pretending it was normal. I was choosing to reach out to people who might help instead of suffering in silence. Marcus's business card was still on my nightstand, and I picked it up in the darkness. Tomorrow, I decided, I would call him and ask to see the dashcam footage. Not because I doubted what had happened, but because I wanted to see it for myself. I wanted to understand exactly what I'd endured that night. And more importantly, I wanted proof that would be impossible for anyone to dismiss or explain away. The rain started again around midnight, gentle this time. Nothing like the violent storm that had changed everything 3 days ago. But as I listened to it pattering against my window, I wasn't afraid. Instead, I felt something I hadn't experienced in a long time: determination. Brooke had spent years making sure I stayed in the shadows, making sure I believed I was less important, less deserving, less worthy of consideration. But shadows only exist when someone is blocking the light. And tomorrow, I was going to start stepping out from behind her. The storm that had left me walking alone in the rain had also brought Marcus into my life. It had shown me who my family really was, but it had also shown me who I could become, and for the first time, I was looking forward to finding out. Thursday morning arrived with crystalline clarity, the kind of perfect autumn day that made everything seem possible. I woke up feeling different somehow, like I'd shed an old skin overnight, and emerged as someone braver, someone who refused to be invisible anymore. The folder labeled evidence on my laptop had grown substantially, and today I was going to see the footage that had started it all. Marcus had agreed to meet me at the Riverside Diner during my lunch break. He'd sounded surprised but pleased when I called him that morning, asking if I could see the dashcam recording from Monday night. There had been something in his voice, a paternal protectiveness that made me think of the daughter he'd mentioned, and I wondered if seeing me walk through that storm had affected him more than he'd let on. At school, I moved through my morning classes with a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in years. When Natalie found me at my locker before lunch, carrying 2 brown bags and wearing a concerned expression, I realized I was actually smiling. "You look different today," she said, falling into step beside me as we walked toward the library. "More? I don't know. Focused? I feel focused," I admitted, like I finally know what I need to do. We settled into our usual corner table in the library, and Natalie unpacked sandwiches and chips with the efficiency of someone who'd clearly done this before. She handed me a turkey and Swiss on sourdough, which happened to be my favorite, though I'd never told her that. "So what's the plan?" she asked, unwrapping her own sandwich. I pulled out my phone and showed her the screenshots I'd collected the night before. Natalie's eyes widened as she scrolled through the images, her expression growing darker with each swipe. She edited you out of the Christmas photo. Natalie's voice was barely above a whisper, but it carried a note of outrage that made something warm unfurl in my chest. Completely, like I was never there. I took a bite of my sandwich, surprised to find that I actually had an appetite for the first time in days. And that post about leaving the family drama behind? She made that while I was walking home in the storm. Natalie set down my phone and stared at me across the table. Zoe, this is systematic. This isn't just sibling rivalry or family dysfunction. This is deliberate psychological manipulation. Hearing someone else say it out loud made it feel more real, more valid. I'm meeting with the Uber driver at lunch. He has footage from that night. Good, you need documentation. Natalie leaned forward, her voice earnest. But you also need to think about what you want to accomplish here. Do you want to confront your family privately? Do you want to involve school administration? Do you want to go public? The questions hung in the air between us, heavy with implication. What did I? For years I'd wanted nothing more than to be seen, to be valued, to matter to the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally. But now I was beginning to understand that those things might not be possible within the dynamic my family had created. I want them to see what they've done, I said finally. I want them to understand that their actions have consequences. And I want to make sure this doesn't happen to anyone else. Natalie nodded slowly. Then you're going to need more than just evidence. You're going to need a platform. The Riverside Diner was exactly the kind of place Marcus belonged in, with its checkered tablecloths and handwritten menu board. He was already seated in a booth near the back when I arrived, looking somehow both nervous and determined. A laptop sat closed on the table in front of him, and he stood up when he saw me approaching. Zoe, he said warmly, extending his hand for a shake that felt surprisingly formal. Thanks for meeting me. How are you holding up? Better, I said, sliding into the booth across from him. Ready to see what really happened that night? Marcus studied my face for a moment, and I could see him taking in the changes since our first meeting. The scared, soaked girl he'd picked up on the side of the road was gone, replaced by someone who'd found her voice. Before we start, he said, opening the laptop, I want you to know that watching this might be difficult. Sometimes seeing yourself from the outside puts things in perspective in ways that can be painful. I nodded, steeling myself for whatever was coming. I need to see. The footage began with Marcus driving through downtown Millbrook in the early evening. The timestamp showed 6:47 p.m., and the weather was already deteriorating rapidly. Rain pelted the windshield, and the wipers struggled to keep up with the deluge. Through the passenger window, the streets looked like something out of a disaster movie, with water rushing along the gutters and trees bending dangerously in the wind. Then I saw myself. The figure walking along the sidewalk looked so small and vulnerable that for a moment I couldn't quite believe it was me. I was hunched against the wind, my backpack weighing me down, my hood providing almost no protection against the rain that seemed to be coming from every direction at once. The streetlights illuminated the storm in stark relief, making it clear just how dangerous the conditions had become. Marcus's voice came through the speakers as he slowed the car. Jesus, that's just a kid out there. The concern in his voice was unmistakable, and I could hear him putting the car in park before the camera showed him rolling down the window. I watched the conversation play out from his perspective, seeing my own hesitation and fear before I finally accepted his help. When I climbed into the car, soaked and shivering, the camera captured just how badly I was shaking, how the cold had gone bone deep. But it was the conversation during the drive that really got to me. Hearing my own voice explain what had happened, listening to the way I tried to minimize and excuse my family's behavior, seeing Marcus's growing alarm as he understood the full scope of the situation. The camera caught everything, my attempts to downplay what had happened, my obvious exhaustion and emotional strain, and the moment when I finally broke down and told the truth about feeling invisible in my own family. When the footage ended, I sat in silence for a long moment, processing what I'd just seen. Marcus reached across the table and gently closed the laptop. That girl you just watched, he said quietly, that's not someone who deserved to be left behind. That's not someone who was being dramatic or asking for special treatment. That's a kid who was abandoned by the people who were supposed to protect her. Tears I hadn't expected began sliding down my cheeks. Not tears of sadness, but tears of validation. For years I'd been told that my feelings were too sensitive, that my expectations were too high, that I needed to be more understanding of my family's priorities. But the footage didn't lie, it showed exactly what had happened, and it was undeniably wrong. "Can I have a copy?" I asked. Marcus nodded, pulling a USB drive from his pocket. "I made this for you this morning. The original stays with me, but this copy is yours to do with whatever you think is right." I held the small device in my palm, marveling at how something so tiny could contain such powerful truth. "Thank you for stopping that night, for caring enough to help, for giving me this." "You don't need to thank me for doing what any decent person would do," Marcus said firmly, "but I do want you to promise me something." I looked up at him expectantly. "Promise me you won't let them convince you that you're wrong about this. I've seen enough in my life to recognize abuse when I see it. And what your family is doing to you isn't normal, it isn't acceptable, and it isn't your fault." The word abuse hit me like a physical blow. I'd been thinking in terms of neglect, favoritism, unfairness, but abuse felt too serious, too dramatic for my situation. Except as I thought about it, what else would you call systematically excluding someone, deliberately leaving them in danger, publicly humiliating them, and gaslighting them into believing they deserved it? "I promise," I said, meaning. Back at school, I sat in the bathroom during 5th period, staring at the USB drive and trying to decide what to do next. The obvious choice was to show the footage to my parents, to confront them with undeniable proof of what had happened. But something told me that wouldn't be enough. They'd already shown their willingness to dismiss my version of events, to prioritize Brooke's comfort over my safety. Video evidence might force them to acknowledge what had happened, but it wouldn't necessarily make them care. That's when I remembered what Natalie had said about needing a platform. If I wanted to create real change, if I wanted to ensure this never happened again, I needed to think bigger than just my family's living room. The Millbrook School District had a policy about student safety that I'd heard referenced in assemblies and seen posted on bulletin boards. Something about creating environments where all students felt valued and protected. I'd never paid much attention to it before, but now I wondered if abandoning a student in dangerous weather conditions might violate those policies. I pulled out my phone and navigated to the school district's website, looking for information about how to file a complaint. What I found was better than I'd hoped, a section on student advocacy that included a form for reporting situations where a student's well-being had been compromised. The form could be submitted anonymously, but it also had an option to request a formal review if the situation involved potential safety violations. My fingers hovered over the keyboard as I debated whether to take this step. Once I filed a formal complaint, there would be no going back. The situation would become official, documented, part of the public record. My family's private dysfunction would become a matter for school administrators and possibly even the school board. But then I thought about the girl in Marcus's dashcam footage, struggling through the storm while her family celebrated without her. I thought about all the other students who might be suffering in silence, who might be told that their pain didn't matter as much as someone else's achievement. I thought about the pattern of erasure and manipulation that had shaped my entire life, and how it would continue unless someone stood up and said it was wrong. I started typing. The complaint form was surprisingly comprehensive, asking for detailed information about the incident, its impact on my educational experience, and any documentation I had to support my claim. I wrote carefully and thoroughly, describing not just Monday night's events, but the broader pattern of neglect and favoritism that had led to the situation. I uploaded the dashcam footage, the social media screenshots, and the weather reports that showed just how dangerous the storm had been. When I finished, I sat looking at the completed form for several minutes. Once I hit submit, there would be no taking it back. My family would find out eventually, and there would be consequences I couldn't predict or control. But for the first time in my life, the consequences of speaking up seemed less frightening than the consequences of staying silent. I hit submit, The automated response email arrived immediately, thanking me for my submission and informing me that a formal review would begin within 40. I would be contacted by a student advocate within the next week to discuss the situation and determine what additional steps might be necessary. I forwarded the email to Natalie with a simple message. "It's done." Her response came back almost immediately. "Proud of you. Whatever happens next, you did the right thing." The rest of the school day passed in a strange blur of normalcy. I went to classes, took notes, answered questions when called upon, but underneath the surface routine, I felt like I was vibrating with nervous energy. I'd set something in motion that I couldn't stop, and while that was terrifying, it was also exhilarating. At dinner that night, my family seemed unusually animated. Brooke had received word that her newspaper interview would indeed be featured prominently in the weekend edition, and the photographer had sent over some preview shots that everyone was gushing over. She looked radiant in the photos, poised and confident, and utterly perfect. Mrs. Schuern from the school board called today. Mom announced as she passed around a bowl of roasted vegetables. They want to nominate Brooke for the Regional Student Excellence Award. Apparently her combination of academic achievement and community leadership really impressed them. "That's incredible, sweetheart," Dad said, beaming at Brooke. "That award comes with a substantial scholarship, doesn't it?" $5,000, Brooke confirmed, unable to hide her excitement. "Plus it looks amazing on college applications. Stanford is definitely going to be impressed." I sat at my usual spot, eating quietly and listening to the familiar rhythm of praise and celebration that surrounded my sister. But tonight, instead of feeling invisible, I felt like I was watching from a great distance. These people, who claimed to love me, had created a family dynamic where one daughter's success was celebrated while the other daughter's suffering was ignored. They'd built a hierarchy where achievements mattered more than basic human decency, where image was more important than reality. "What about you, Zoe?" Connor asked, and once again the table turned to look at me with surprise. "Any exciting news to share?" I met his gaze directly, thinking about his Instagram posts mocking my situation. "Actually, I filed a formal complaint with the school district today about student safety policies." The table went quiet. Mom set down her fork with a small clink that seemed unnaturally loud in the sudden silence. "A complaint about what?" Dad asked carefully. "About students being left without safe transportation in dangerous weather conditions," I said, keeping my voice level and calm. "Apparently it's a violation of district policy for families to abandon children at school during severe weather warnings." Brooke's face had gone pale. "You did?" "I did." I looked around the table, taking in their shocked expressions, complete with documentation, witness statements, and video evidence. "Video evidence?" Mom's voice was barely a whisper. "Dashcam footage from the Uber driver who found me walking home in the storm Monday night. It shows pretty clearly what the conditions were like and what state I was in when he picked me up." Dad cleared his throat, his lawyer instincts clearly kicking in. "Zoe, I think we should discuss this privately before." "Before what?" I interrupt. "Before the school board reviews the evidence and determines whether leaving a minor in danger constitutes a violation of student safety policies. Before they investigate whether there's a pattern of neglect that might affect my educational experience." Connor had gone very quiet, probably remembering his social media posts about the incident. Brooke was staring at me like she'd never seen me before, her perfect composure finally cracking. "You're trying to ruin my senior year," she said, her voice shaking with anger. "You're trying to sabotage my scholarship opportunities because you can't stand to see me succeed." "No," I said firmly, "I'm trying to ensure that what happened to me Monday night never happens to any other student. I'm trying to establish that leaving children in dangerous situations is unacceptable, regardless of what other plans people might have." "It was one incident," Brooke snapped. "One time when our plans didn't align perfectly, and you're trying to turn it into some kind of federal case." I reached for my phone and pulled up the folder of screenshots I'd collected. "One incident. Let's see." I started scrolling through the images. "Here's you editing me out of the family Christmas photo. Here's you posting about leaving family drama behind while I was walking through a storm. Here's Connor joking about me getting soaked and learning my lesson. Here's 3 years worth of family events where I'm either absent from your social media or barely visible." I set the phone on the table where everyone could see it. This isn't about one incident, bro. This is about a pattern of behavior that culminated in you knowingly leaving me in danger because my safety was less important than your dinner plans. The silence that followed was deafening. Mom was staring at the phone screen, her face cycling through expressions of shock, guilt, and dawning realization. Dad looked like he was trying to calculate the legal implications of what he was hearing. Connor seemed to have shrunk into his chair, probably wishing he'd never posted those Instagram stories, but it was Brooke's reaction that surprised me most. Instead of the anger or defensiveness I'd expected, she looked genuinely stunned, like she was seeing herself clearly for the first time. "I didn't," she started, then stopped. "I mean, I never intended." "You intended exactly what happened," I said quietly. "You intended to prioritize your social life over my safety. You intended to make me feel small and unimportant. You intended to maintain a family dynamic where your needs always come first, regardless of the cost to anyone else." I stood up from the table, leaving my half-finished dinner behind. "The school district will be contacting you soon to discuss their findings. I thought you should know." As I walked upstairs to my room, I could hear the explosion of voices behind me, accusations, denials, damage control strategies, but for the first time in my life I wasn't part of that conversation. I wasn't trying to smooth things over, or make excuses or minimize the impact of my own feeling. I was done being the family's emotional janitor, cleaning up the messes that everyone else's selfishness left behind. I was done accepting crumbs of attention and calling it love. I was done being invisible. In my room, I sat at my desk and opened my laptop. There was an email waiting from Dr. Patricia Vaughn, the school district's student advocate. She wanted to schedule a meeting for Friday afternoon to discuss my complaint and review the evidence I'd submitted. She also mentioned that depending on their findings, the matter might need to be presented to the school board for formal review. I stared at the email for a long moment, feeling the weight of what I'd set in motion. There would be consequences for my family, probably difficult ones. Brooke's perfect image might be tarnished. My parents might face scrutiny from other families and community members. The comfortable fiction they'd built around their parenting might crumble under examination. But as I listened to the continued arguing downstairs, I realized I wasn't sorry. For 17 years, I'd protected their comfort at the expense of my own well-being. I'd made myself small so they could feel big. I'd accepted the unacceptable because it was easier than fighting for something better. Those days were over. I typed back a reply to Dr. Vaughn, confirming the Friday meeting and thanking her for taking my concerns seriously. Then I opened a new document and began writing down everything I could remember about the pattern of treatment I'd experienced over the year. Every dismissal, every erasure, every moment when I'd been made to feel like my feelings didn't matter. If they wanted a federal case, I was going to give them one, and this time, I wasn't going to be the one left standing in the rain. Friday morning brought an unexpected visitor to our front door. I was getting ready for school when I heard the doorbell ring, followed by muffled voices, and what sounded like my mother's surprised gasp. Curious, I crept to the top of the stairs and peered down through the banister. Standing in our entryway was Principal Foster, looking uncomfortable but determined. He was holding a manila folder and speaking in the low, serious tone that administrators used when delivering bad news. Mom was still in her bathrobe, her hair disheveled, clearly caught off guard by the early morning visit. "Miss Harper, I'm sorry to disturb you so early, but we need to discuss a situation involving Zoe that's come to our attention," Principal Foster was saying. "The district office has asked me to conduct a preliminary investigation, and I wanted to speak with your family before this matter progresses any further." I could see Mom's face from my vantage point, and she looked like someone who'd just been told they were under audit by the IRS. "What kind of situation?" "Zoe hasn't mentioned any problems at school." "Actually, Mrs. Harper, the problem doesn't appear to be at school. According to the complaint filed with the district, the issue involves what happened to Zoe outside of school hours, specifically her transportation situation during Monday's severe weather event." The color drained from Mom's face. "Oh, that. Yes, the district takes student safety very seriously, and when we receive documentation of a minor being abandoned in dangerous weather conditions, we're obligated to investigate." Principal Foster's voice was professional but firm. Is your husband available? I'd like to speak with both parents together. I heard Mom call for Dad, her voice tight with barely controlled panic. While she went to get him, I retreated to my room and finished getting ready for school, my heart pounding with a mixture of anxiety and vindication. The process I'd set in motion was already having consequences, and there was no going back now. By the time I came downstairs with my backpack, Principal Foster was seated at our kitchen table with both my parents. The manila folder was open in front of him, and I could see printed pages that looked like they might be screenshots from my complaint. The atmosphere in the room was tense enough to cut with a knife. "Oh, Zoe," Principal Foster said when he saw me. "Good morning. I was hoping to speak with you as well before you head to school." "Is everything all right?" I asked, though of course I knew exactly what this was about. "We're discussing the complaint you filed with the district office this week. Your parents weren't aware that you'd taken this step, so I wanted to make sure everyone was on the same page moving forward." I could feel my parents' eyes on me, but I kept my gaze focused on Principal Foster. I documented what happened and submitted it through the proper channel. I thought that was the responsible thing to do. "It absolutely was," he said firmly. "Student safety is our top priority, and you were right to bring this to our attention." He turned back to my parents. "Mr. and Miss Harper, I've reviewed the evidence Zoe submitted, including video footage of the incident in question. I have to say, the conditions she was walking in were genuinely dangerous. We had 3 tree-related incidents that night, flooding in several areas, and emergency services were advising people to stay off the roads, unless absolutely necessary." Dad cleared his throat. "Obviously, if we'd known how bad the weather was going to get, we would have made different arrangements. Actually, sir, according to the documentation, severe weather warnings were issued throughout the day. The National Weather Service had been broadcasting alerts since early afternoon." Principal Foster consulted his notes. "Additionally, we have social media evidence suggesting that the decision to leave Zoe without transportation was made, despite awareness of the weather condition." I watched my parents exchange glances, and I could see them trying to figure out how much Principal Foster knew and how much damage control they might be able to do. "We had important family obligations that evening," Mom said carefully. "Sometimes difficult choices have to be made about priorities. Mrs. Harper, with all due respect, ensuring a minor child's safe transportation during severe weather isn't a difficult choice. It's a basic parental responsibility." Principal Foster's tone remained professional, but there was an edge to it now. "What concerns the district is not just this isolated incident, but the pattern it appears to represent." Dad's voice had taken on the careful modulation he used in court when he was trying to control a situation. "The evidence suggests that this isn't the first time Zoe's needs have been deprioritized in favor of other family members' activity. While the district obviously can't and won't interfere in normal family dynamics, we do have an obligation to ensure that all our students feel supported and valued." I stood there listening to this conversation, marveling at how different it felt to have an adult in authority take my situation seriously. For years I'd been told that my feelings were too sensitive, that I expected too much, that I needed to be more understanding. But Principal Foster was looking at the same facts my family had dismissed, and reaching completely different conclusions. "What happens next?" I asked. "Well, the district student advocate will be meeting with you this afternoon to discuss the situation in more detail. Depending on what comes out of that meeting, this matter may be referred to the school board for formal review." He closed the folder and stood up. "In the meantime, I want to make sure you feel safe and supported at school. If you need anything, or if there are any changes in your home situation that affect your ability to attend classes, please let me know immediately." After Principal Foster left, the silence in our kitchen was deafening. I poured myself a glass of orange juice and checked my phone, pretending not to notice the way my parents were staring at me. "Zoe," Dad finally said, "we need to talk about this." "What's to talk about?" "I filed a complaint about a safety issue, and it's being investigated." "That seems pretty straightforward." "You blindsided us," Mom said, her voice shaking slightly. "You went behind our backs and involved the school district in our family business." I looked up from my phone and met her eyes directly. "My safety isn't family business, Mom. It's a basic human right, and I didn't go behind your backs. I tried to talk to you about what happened, and you dismissed it. So I found adults who would take it seriously. Do you have any idea what this could do to your sister's opportunities? Dad asked. If this becomes public, if there are formal hearings, it could affect her scholarship applications, her college prospects, her reputation in the community. There it was again. Brooke's opportunities taking precedence over my well-being. Even now, faced with evidence of their negligence, their first concern was protecting my sister from the consequences of their actions. Maybe Brooke should have thought about that before she posted on social media about leaving me behind. I said calmly. Maybe you should have thought about it before you chose her social life over my safety. Mom's face crumpled slightly. We didn't choose anything. We didn't think it through properly. You didn't think at all, that's the problem. I shouldered my backpack and headed for the door. I need to get to school. We can continue this conversation later, but my position isn't going to change. What happened was wrong, and I'm not going to pretend otherwise anymore. At school, word had somehow gotten out that there was drama involving my family and the administration. I could feel eyes on me as I walked through the hallways, and I caught snippets of whispered conversations that seemed to involve my name. But for the first time, the attention didn't make me want to disappear. Instead, I felt something like pride. I'd stood up for myself, and people were noticing. Natalie found me at my locker between second and third period. So I heard Principal Foster paid your family a visit this morning, she said without preamble. News travels fast around here. Mrs. Martinez in the office is dating my cousin. She said he looked pretty serious when he left the building earlier. Natalie studied my face. How are you holding up? Better than I expected. Actually, it's weird, but having adults take this seriously makes me feel less crazy about the whole thing. Good. Because I have some information you might find interesting. Natalie glanced around to make sure no one was listening, then leaned closer. Apparently, Connor's been doing damage control all morning. He deleted those Instagram posts about you, and he's been telling people that if anyone asks, he was never at your house. Monday night, I felt a cold smile spread across my face. Too bad for him that screenshots are forever. Exactly. And speaking of screenshots, Iris wants to talk to you. She has more stuff to show you apparently. I found Iris waiting by the water fountains near the gym, looking nervous but determined. When she saw me approaching, she pulled out her phone and immediately launched into what sounded like a prepared speech. I've been thinking about our conversation yesterday, and I realized I wasn't being completely honest with you, she said rapidly. There's more, about Brooke, about the way she operates, about things I've seen her do to other people. What kind of things? Iris glanced around nervously. Remember sophomore year, when Emma Caldwell was nominated for homecoming court, and then suddenly, there were all those rumors about her shoplifting from the mall. I remember. Emma had been withdrawn from consideration after store security footage allegedly showed her stealing makeup, though the charges were eventually dropped when it turned out to be a case of mistaken identity. Brooke started those rumors. Iris continued. She was furious that Emma got nominated instead of her friends, so she spread stories about seeing Emma steal things. She even convinced Connor to back up her story. The information hit me like a physical blow. She deliberately tried to destroy someone's reputation over homecoming court. That's not even the worst part. When the truth came out, and everyone realized Emma was innocent, Brooke acted like she'd been defending her all along. She organized this big campaign to support Emma, and make sure everyone knew what a terrible mistake had been made. I stared at Iris in horror. She created the problem, and then positioned herself as the solution. Exactly. And everyone praised her for being such a good friend and standing up for justice. Iris's voice was bitter. That's how she works, so she creates chaos behind the scenes, then publicly presents herself as the voice of reason and compassion. Why are you telling me this now? Because I think she's going to try to do the same thing to you. When this school district investigation gets serious, when people start asking questions, she's going to find a way to make herself look like the caring sister who's been worried about your mental health, or your tendency to exaggerate, or whatever story lets her maintain her image. The prediction proved remarkably accurate. By lunchtime, word had somehow spread that I was meeting with the student advocate that afternoon, and suddenly Brooke was everywhere, playing the role of concerned older sister. I watched from across the cafeteria as she sat at her usual table, surrounded by friends, who hung on her every word. "I'm just so worried about her," I heard her saying, as I passed by their table. "She's been acting strange lately, making these wild accusations about things that happen. I think the stress of junior year might be getting to her." Several of her friends made sympathetic noises, offering support and understanding. One of them mentioned a cousin who'd had a nervous breakdown during high school, and suddenly Brooke was nodding knowingly, as if my supposed mental health crisis explained everything. I stopped walking and turned to face their table directly. The conversation died as they realized I'd been listening. "Hi, Brooke," I said pleasantly. "Talking about me?" My sister's face flushed, but she recovered quickly. "Just expressing concern for your well-being, Zoe. We all care about you." "How thoughtful. I especially appreciate the concern for my mental health." "Very creative angle." I smiled sweetly. "I'm sure the student advocate will find your theories about my psychological state very interesting when she interviews you." The color drained from Brooke's face. "Oh, didn't I mention, Dr. Vaughn wants to speak with all relevant family members as part of her investigation. I'm sure she'll want to hear your perspective on Monday night's events." I paused. "And probably your thoughts on social media responsibility, given some of the posts that are part of the evidence file." I walked away before she could respond, leaving her to deal with the confused questions from her friends about what exactly had happened Monday night, and why there was an investigation. For once I was the one controlling the narrative, and it felt incredible. The meeting with Dr. Vaughn took place in a small conference room at the district office. She was a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and the air of someone who'd seen enough teenage drama to recognize the real from the manufacture. She had my complaint file spread out on the table in front of her, along with what looked like additional documentation. "Thank you for coming in, Zoe," she said as I settled into a chair across from her. "I've reviewed all the materials you submitted, and I have to say, this is one of the most thoroughly documented cases I've encountered. I wanted to make sure you had all the facts." "You certainly did that. The video footage alone is quite compelling. But I'm more interested in the broader pattern you've documented. This appears to go far beyond a single incident of poor judgment." For the next hour, Dr. Vaughn asked detailed questions about my family dynamics, my relationship with my sister, and the ways I'd been treated over the years. She was particularly interested in the social media evidence and the systematic erasure I'd documented. "What you're describing," she said finally, "is a form of emotional abuse called scapegoat. It's when one family member is consistently blamed, minimized, or ignored to protect the dysfunction of the family system." There was that word again, abuse. Coming from a professional who dealt with these situations regularly, it carried even more weight. "The question now is what you want to see happen as a result of this investigation. Are you looking for family counseling? Do you want the district to implement new policies about student transportation? Are you seeking some form of accountability for what occurred?" I'd been thinking about this question for days. "I want to make sure this doesn't happen to other students, and I want my family to understand that there are consequences when you treat people like they don't matter." Dr. Vaughn nodded approvingly. "Those are reasonable goals. Based on the evidence you've provided, I'm recommending that this case be presented to the school board at their next public meeting." The board takes student safety violations very seriously, particularly when there's documented evidence of neglect. A public meeting? Yeah, the board meets twice a month and there's always a period for addressing student concerns. Your case would be presented as part of the district's ongoing commitment to student welfare. She leaned forward slightly. "I should warn you, this will likely attract some attention. Local media sometimes covers school board meetings, especially when they involve student safety issues." The idea of my family's dysfunction being discussed in a public forum was both terrifying and exhilarating. For years they'd been able to maintain their perfect image because everything happened behind closed doors. But accountability required transparency. "When is the next meeting?" "Next Tuesday evening. Would you be prepared to speak about your experience?" I thought about the girl in Marcus's dashcam footage, struggling through the storm while her family celebrated without her. I thought about all the other students who might be suffering in silence, who might see my story and realize they didn't have to accept the unacceptable. Yes, I said firmly. I'll be ready. That evening I came home to find both my parents waiting in the living room, looking like they'd been having a very serious conversation. Brooke was noticeably absent, probably hiding in her room to avoid the fallout from whatever they'd learned about the investigation. Zoe, sit down, Dad said, his lawyer voice in full effect. We need to discuss this situation. I remained standing. What situation? Don't play games with us, Mom said, her voice strained. We know about the school board meeting. We know this is going to become public. And we think you've made your point, Dad continued. We understand that you felt neglected, and we're willing to acknowledge that we could have handled Monday night better. But taking this to a public forum is going to hurt your sister. And frankly, it's going to hurt our family's reputation in the community. I stared at them, amazed by their ability to make this about Brooke even now. My point? You think this is about making a point, isn't it? Mom asked. You wanted our attention, and you have it. You wanted us to take your concerns seriously, and but surely we can resolve this within the family. Like we resolved it when I tried to talk to you about what happened. Like we resolved it when you told me I was being too sensitive. Like we resolved it when you prioritized Brooke's interview over my safety. Dad's jaw tight. Zoe, be reasonable. If this becomes public, it could affect Brooke's college applications, her scholarship opportunities, even her chances of getting into Stanford. Is your need for vindication really worth sabotaging your sister's future? The question hung in the air between us, and I realized this was the moment that would define everything going forward. They were offering me a choice: back down now and return to the old dynamic, or continue forward and face whatever consequences came with speaking truth to power. I thought about Marcus stopping in the storm because he couldn't stand to see someone suffering. I thought about Iris risking her social standing to share what she knew. I thought about Natalie bringing me sandwiches and listening to my story like it mattered. I thought about Vaughn taking my documentation seriously and calling what had happened by its real name. Brooke's future isn't more important than my well-being, I said quietly, and if her opportunities are based on maintaining a lie about who she really is, then maybe they're not opportunities she deserves. Mom's face crumpled. How can you say that about your own sister? How can you ask me to sacrifice my safety to protect her image? I shot back. How can you sit there and worry about her reputation when you never worried about my welfare? That's not fair, Dad protested. We love you both equally. No, you don't, and I have 17 years of evidence to prove it. I headed toward the stairs, then turned back. The school board meeting is Tuesday at 7 p.m. You're welcome to attend if you want to hear what I have to say, but I'm not changing my mind. That night, I lay in bed listening to the muffled sounds of argument coming from my parents' room, raised voices, defensive justifications, desperate strategizing about damage control. For once, I wasn't the target of their anger or the victim of their disappointment. I was the catalyst for a reckoning they could no longer avoid. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. Heard through the grapevine that things are moving forward. Just wanted you to know I'm proud of you for standing up for yourself. That takes real courage. I typed back. Thank you for giving me the proof I needed. I couldn't have done this without your help. You could have, came his immediate reply. You just needed someone to see you clearly and tell you what you were worth. That girl in the storm deserved better, and she's finally getting it. As I drifted off to sleep, I thought about the school board meeting, about speaking publicly about my experience, about all the ways my life was about to change. There would be consequences, some of them difficult. My family might never forgive me for exposing their dysfunction. Brooke's perfect image might be permanently tarnished. Our comfortable fiction of being a happy family would be shattered. But for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid of the consequence. I was afraid of what would happen if I stayed silent, if I continued to enable a system that treated me like I didn't matter, if I let other students suffer because I was too scared to speak up. Tuesday was 5 days away, 5 days to prepare for the moment when I would finally step out of the shadows and into the light, when I would tell my story to people who had the power to create change, when I would transform from the invisible girl into someone whose voice could no longer be ignored. The blur was finally coming into focus. Tuesday evening arrived with the kind of crisp October air that made everything feel possible. I stood in front of my bedroom mirror, adjusting the navy blue dress I'd chosen for the school board meeting. It was simple but polished, the kind of outfit that said I was serious without trying too hard. My hands were steady as I brushed my hair, though my heart was beating fast with anticipation rather than fear. The drive to the district office building was silent. Mom and Dad sat in the front seat, their faces grim and resigned. They'd made one last attempt that morning to convince me to withdraw my complaint, offering everything from a family vacation to a new car if I'd just let this go. But their desperation only confirmed what I already knew. This wasn't about protecting Brooke anymore. This was about protecting themselves from having to confront the truth about the family they'd created. Brooke hadn't spoken to me in 3 days. She'd moved through the house like a ghost, avoiding eye contact and communicating only through terse messages passed through our parents. Her newspaper interview had been published over the weekend to great fanfare, but the celebration had been muted by the looming specter of the school board meeting. Even her moment of triumph felt hollow when overshadowed by the reckoning that was coming. The district office parking lot was fuller than I'd expected. Cars lined the spaces, and I could see people walking toward the main entrance in small groups, many of them carrying folders or notebooks. The regular school board meeting was clearly drawing more attention than usual, though I suspected most people had no idea what they were about to witness. Inside the building, the main conference room had been set up auditorium style, with rows of chairs facing a long table where the board members sat. Dr. Vaughn was already there, speaking quietly with the board chairwoman, a distinguished woman in her 60s who I recognized from newspaper photos. When she saw me enter, Dr. Vaughn waved me over. "Zoe, I want you to meet Dr. Rebecca Martinez, our board chairwoman," she said. "Dr. Martinez, this is the student I told you about." Dr. Martinez stood up and extended her hand with a warm smile. "Thank you for bringing this matter to our attention, Zoe. It takes courage to speak up when something isn't right, and I want you to know the board takes these concerns very seriously." "Thank you for listening," I replied, shaking her. "You'll be speaking during the student concerns portion of our agenda, which should begin in about 20 minutes. Take a seat wherever you're comfortable, and Dr. Vaughn will call you up when it's time." I found a seat in the third row, close enough to feel connected to the proceedings but far enough back to observe the crowd. Marcus had arrived and was sitting near the back, giving me an encouraging nod when our eyes met. Natalie was there with her parents, who had apparently insisted on coming to show support. Even Iris had shown up, sitting alone but looking determined. My parents had taken seats on the opposite side of the room as if physical distance could somehow separate them from what was about to happen. They sat stiffly, whispering occasionally to each other but mostly staring straight ahead with the resigned expressions of people waiting for a verdict they already knew would go against them. Brooke was notably absent. She'd claimed she had a college prep seminar that evening, but I suspected she simply couldn't bear to hear her carefully constructed image dismantled in public. Connor was nowhere to be seen either, probably hoping that if he stayed away from the proceedings, no one would remember his role in the situation. The meeting began with routine business, budget discussions, policy updates, and approval of various administrative matters. I half listened to the formal proceedings, my mind focused on what I was going to say when my turn came. I'd practiced my statement dozens of times, but sitting here in this room full of people, the weight of the moment felt enormous. Finally, Dr. Martinez called for the student concerns portion of the agenda. "Tonight we have a presentation from our student advocate, Dr. Patricia Vaughn, regarding a safety incident that came to our attention last week." Dr. Vaughn stood up and moved to a podium that had been set up to the side of the board table. She opened her folder and began speaking in the clear, professional tone I'd come to appreciate. "Members of the board, community members, and students, I want to present a case that highlights the importance of our district's commitment to student safety and well-being. Last week, A junior student at Millbrook Regional High School filed a formal complaint regarding an incident that occurred during the severe weather event on Monday, October 14th. She clicked a remote, and a projection screen descended from the ceiling. The first slide showed the weather warnings that had been issued that day, official alerts with timestamps and severity ratings that painted a clear picture of how dangerous the conditions had been. The student in question was left at school without safe transportation during a severe weather warning, forcing her to walk approximately 4 miles home in dangerous conditions. Dr. Vaughn clicked to the next slide, which showed a map of my route home with weather-related incidents marked along the way. During this walk, she was exposed to high winds, heavy rain, flooding, and fallen debris. She was eventually picked up by a rideshare driver who was concerned for her safety. The room was completely silent now, with everyone's attention focused on the presentation. I could see people leaning forward in their seats, and a few were taking notes. What makes this case particularly concerning is not just the isolated incident, but the pattern of behavior it represents. Dr. Vaughn clicked to a new slide showing a timeline of incidents I'd documented. The student provided extensive evidence of systematic exclusion from family activities, deliberate erasure from family photos and social media, and a consistent pattern of her needs being deprioritized in favor of other family members. More slides followed, showing selected screenshots from Brooke's social media, the edited Christmas photo, and excerpts from the witness statements Dr. Vaughn had collected. I watched my parents sink lower in their seats as the evidence mounted, their faces growing paler with each revelation. The student who brought this to our attention is here tonight to speak for herself, Dr. Vaughn concluded. But before we hear from her, I want to emphasize that this case represents exactly the kind of situation our student safety policies are designed to address. No child should be put at risk because adults fail to prioritize their well-being. Dr. Martinez nodded gravely. Thank you, Dr. Vaughn. Would the student like to address the board? I stood up on legs that felt steadier than I'd expected. The walk to the podium seemed to take forever, but when I reached it and looked out at the assembled crowd, I felt a strange sense of calm settle over me. These people were here to listen. They were taking this seriously, and for the first time in my life, I had a platform to tell my truth. Good evening, I began, my voice carrying clearly through the room. My name is Zoe Harper, and I'm a junior at Millbrook Regional High School. I'm here tonight not just to talk about what happened to me last Monday, but to talk about what happens when young people are taught that their safety and well-being don't matter as much as other people's convenience. I paused, looking around the room and making eye contact with various audience members. Marcus gave me an encouraging nod. Natalie was smiling. Even some people I didn't recognize seemed to be listening intently. Last Monday night, my family left me at school without transportation during a severe weather warning because they had dinner plans that didn't include me. When I walked home in dangerous conditions and nearly got hurt, they told me I was being too dramatic. When I tried to explain how scared and alone I felt, they told me I was too sensitive. When I asked why my safety mattered less than my sister's social life, they told me I needed to be more understanding. My voice grew stronger as I continued, but the thing is, I had been understanding. For 17 years I'd been understanding when my needs came last. I'd been understanding when my achievements were overshadowed by my sister's success. I'd been understanding when I was excluded from family photos and events. I'd been so understanding that I almost forgot I had the right to expect better. I could see some people in the audience nodding, and a few were wiping their eyes. This wasn't just my story anymore. It was resonating with others who had felt invisible or unheard. The night I walked home in that storm, a stranger stopped to help me. Marcus Thompson, who's here tonight, saw a young person in danger and couldn't drive past without doing something about it. He gave me a ride home, he listened to my story, and he told me something I'd never heard before, that what was happening to me wasn't normal, and it wasn't acceptable. I turned slightly to acknowledge Marcus, who was sitting up straighter in his seat with a proud expression on his face. That conversation changed everything for me. For the first time, I realized that being resourceful shouldn't mean being abandoned. Being independent shouldn't mean being ignored. And being the younger sibling shouldn't mean being disposable. My voice was steady now, filled with conviction. I filed this complaint not because I wanted to hurt my family, but because I wanted to make sure no other student has to walk home alone in a storm, while wondering why they don't matter enough to be kept safe. I pulled out a piece of paper with my closing remarks, though I barely needed to glance at it. This district has policies about student safety and well-being for a reason. When those policies are violated, there have to be consequences. When young people are put at risk because adults prioritize other things over their safety, that's not a family matter, it's a community matter. It's everyone's responsibility to make sure children are protected and valued. I looked directly at my parents for the first time since beginning my statement. I love my family, but love isn't supposed to hurt. Love isn't supposed to make you feel small or invisible or unworthy of protection. Real love means keeping someone safe even when it's inconvenient. Real love means valuing someone even when they're not performing, or achieving, or making you look good. The room was absolutely silent when I finished speaking. I stood at the podium for a moment, letting my words settle, then returned to my seat. Dr. Martinez cleared her throat before speaking. Thank you, Zoe. That was incredibly brave. And your message is one that I think everyone in this room needed to hear. She turned to address the full board. Before we discuss next steps, I want to open the floor for public comments related to this matter. To my surprise, several people stood up to speak. A woman I didn't recognize talked about her own experience feeling invisible in her family as a child. A teacher from the high school spoke about the importance of believing students when they report problems. A parent talked about how the presentation had made her think differently about favoritism between siblings. But it was Marcus who provided the most powerful testimony. When he stood up to speak, his presence seemed to fill the room. My name is Marcus Thompson and I'm the driver who picked up Zoe that night, he began. I want everyone in this room to understand what I saw when I found her walking in that storm. This wasn't a teenager who was being dramatic or trying to get attention. This was a child who had been abandoned in dangerous conditions, who was scared and hurt and trying to be brave because no one else was looking out for her. His voice carried the weight of authority and genuine emotion. I've been driving for rideshare companies for 5 years. And I've seen a lot of things, but I've never seen anything that bothered me more than watching this young lady struggle through that storm alone. What happened to her wasn't just wrong, it was dangerous, and anyone who thinks otherwise needs to examine their priorities. Marcus sat down to a round of spontaneous applause that seemed to surprise everyone, including Dr. Martinez. The board members exchanged glances before the chairwoman called for a brief recess to discuss their response. During the break, people approached me from all directions. Some were community members who wanted to express support. Others were students who shared their own stories of feeling overlooked or undervalued. A reporter from the Millbrook Gazette asked if I'd be willing to do an interview, and I found myself saying yes without hesitation. When the board reconvened, Dr. Martinez announced their decision. After reviewing the evidence and hearing tonight's testimony, the board has voted unanimously to implement several new measures. First, we will be reviewing and strengthening our student safety policies to ensure that situations like this are prevented in the future. Second, we will be establishing a student advocacy program that provides additional resources for young people who feel unsafe or unsupported. Third, we will be requiring mandatory training for all district staff on recognizing and responding to signs of neglect or emotional abuse. She paused to look directly at me. Additionally, the board wants to commend Zoe Harper for her courage in bringing this matter to our attention. Her willingness to speak up has already led to positive changes that will benefit countless students in the future. The meeting concluded with another round of applause. And suddenly I was surrounded by people wanting to shake my hand, offer support, or share their own stories. It was overwhelming but wonderful, like being wrapped in a blanket of validation, after years of being told my feelings didn't matter. As the crowd began to thin out, I noticed my parents approaching hesitantly. They looked older somehow, worn down by the weight of having their parenting examined in public. Mom's eyes were red-rimmed, and Dad seemed to have aged years in the span of a few hours. Zoe, Mom said quietly, can we talk? I looked at them for a long moment, these people who had shaped my life in ways both good and harmful. What do you want to say? We want to say we're sorry, Dad said, his voice rougher than usual. We want to say that we heard you tonight, and we understand now how badly we failed you. Mom nodded, tears starting to flow freely. We got so caught up in celebrating Brooke's achievements that we forgot to celebrate you. We got so focused on her future that we neglected your present. And we're so sorry. The apology felt genuine, but I knew it was just the beginning. I appreciate that, I said carefully, but apologies are just words unless they lead to real change. What do you need from us? Mom asked. How do we fix this? I thought about the question seriously. I need you to see me as more than just Brooke's sister. I need you to value my feelings, even when they're inconvenient. I need you to prioritize my safety and well-being, the same way you prioritize hers. And I need you to understand that love isn't just about providing for someone's basic needs. It's about making them feel valued and important and worthy of consideration. Dad nodded slowly. We can do that. We want to do that. Then we can start over, I said. But this time you need to prove it with actions, not just promises. As my parents walked away to process what had happened, Marcus appeared at my side. How are you feeling? He asked. Different, I said, considering the question. Like I've been carrying something heavy for so long that I forgot what it felt like to stand up straight. Marcus smiled. That girl I picked up in the storm was brave, but she didn't know it yet. Tonight, you showed everyone exactly how strong you really are. Over the following weeks, the changes in my life were dramatic and multifaceted. The local newspaper ran a feature story about my situation that sparked conversations throughout the community about family dynamics and child advocacy. I received letters from students at other schools sharing their own experiences of feeling invisible or undervalued, and several asked for advice on how to speak up for themselves. At home, the atmosphere was tentative but improved. My parents were making genuine efforts to include me in decisions and acknowledge my achievements. They attended my next photography exhibition and seemed genuinely proud of my work. Brooke and I were still working through our relationship, but she had started therapy to address her need to control and diminish others in order to feel superior. Most importantly, the school district followed through on their promise. The new student advocacy program launched with me as one of the founding student advisors, and we'd already helped several young people navigate difficult family situations. Vaughn offered me a part-time position helping to train staff on recognizing signs of emotional neglect, and I discovered I had a talent for helping others find their voices. 6 months later, I stood at the same podium where I'd told my story, but this time I was addressing a statewide conference on student advocacy. The audience was filled with educators, social workers, and young people who were working to create change in their own community. My name is Zoe Harper, I began, and I used to be invisible, but I learned that invisibility isn't a permanent condition. It's something that happens when we accept other people's definitions of our worth instead of defining it for ourselves. I looked out at the engaged faces in the audience, thinking about the girl who had walked home in that storm 6 months ago. She had been scared and alone, convinced that her pain didn't matter and her voice didn't count, but she had been wrong about her own power. The most important thing I've learned is that your story matters, even when people try to convince you it doesn't. Your feelings are valid, even when others dismiss them, and your voice has power, even when you're told to stay quiet. I smiled, feeling the truth of those words in my bones. You don't have to be the main character in someone else's story, you can write your own. The applause that followed was warm and sustained, but more importantly, I could see the recognition in the eyes of the young people in the audience. They understood what it meant to feel invisible, and they were learning that they didn't have to stay that way. After the presentation, as I packed up my materials and prepared to head home, I thought about the storm that had changed everything. At the time, it had felt like the worst thing that could happen to me, but it had actually been the beginning of the best thing, learning that I mattered, that I deserved better, and that I had the power to create change. I pulled out my phone and sent a text to Marcus, who had become something like a mentor and friend. Just finished the conference presentation. Thank you for stopping that night. You saved more than just my life. His response came quickly. You saved your own life, Zoe. I just gave you a ride home, but we both knew it had been more than that. He had given me something infinitely more valuable than transportation. He had given me the gift of being seen, of being valued, of being told that I mattered. And from that gift I had built a new life where I was no longer invisible, no longer silent, no longer willing to accept less than I deserved. The rain had stopped, and the sun was shining, and for the first time in my life, I was standing fully in its light. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up, just click and check them out.